So for the last session, we thought we'd do something slightly different, and there might be a few questions. We're going to keep this kind of casual enough, but I think we'll kind of chat for a minute, and then we'll open the floor up to kind of questions. And how can I say this? Please feel free to ask a question, or just we'll keep it safe. If you want to, just don't worry about sounding stupid. Like if you want to just maybe ask something, and we'll get the gist of it. Gareth, we can. Get the mic figured out, but we're going to just cover a wee bit of ground first because I think this is a really interesting topic. It's really about the evolution of AI and serverless. There's an awful lot has happened probably in the past, I'll say 10 years. I think the last two talks were brilliant. They really kind of set the scene, and this kind of maybe shows what's happening going forward. And really for us, I mean, the main focus of this event is really about the engineer. How do we help the engineer build better serverless applications? So we thought we'd just hit on that. And for our panel here, maybe you just want to introduce yourself quickly.
I'm Gillian. I am a solutions architect at AWS. I used to work with these lovely folks here, though, back in Liberty. And I work on an acceleration team. So we look at building things to kind of solve common problems that lots of different customers have. And I work primarily in our customer experience space, which is mostly our communication applications, like our call center and different things like that. So
I'm Mark McCann, architect at Globalization Partners. Been working with Dave and Gillian for many years. I'm also representing Gillian McCann, who couldn't be here today as well. So I'll cover her a bit as well, Dave.
Cool. So really, the three kind of things we'll head on, and probably going back. I mean, I remember we're big fans of Simon Wardley and the stuff that he's done, and I remember probably about 10 years ago, Simon Wardley's a researcher, he's the creator of Wardley Mapping, and when he was writing his book on Medium, there was one of the chapters was about conversational programming and serverless. I think it was about 10 years ago. And he had this little story where he said, in the future, someday you will go in and somebody will say, we need an application. And you'll be able to say, I would like an application that does this and maybe makes this call and makes a payment and you would have that conversation, and AI and serverless would generate that application. And he did a Wardley map saying how this would happen. I remember, Mark, you and I were looking at this thinking, that's kind of interesting, but that's a bit mad. That's complete nonsense.
Yeah, so we couldn't visualize it at all.
No, it's just like, that's too far, that's too out there. And there's really two parts of that were exciting. The fact that the serverless or the cloud compute capability would be such a high level of abstraction that you generate these capabilities. And then the conversation and the AI, we would turn that into like effectively in old speak a requirements document or specification document. But little did we know. One of the big things then was Gillian McCann, who we were all working together, and Gillian was one of the very early kind of pioneers of serverless. And then Gillian had a brilliant talk back, I think it was 2017.
Yeah, 2017 New York Serverless Conf, very first Serverless Conf as well.
There you go.
Yeah, and her talk, and I took notes before this because you couldn't make it. So her talk was around conversational interfaces and how you can leverage serverless to deliver this chatbot experience. And Gillian worked with Gillian Armstrong on this project. So she was able to do a talk on what are the emerging practices, what are the new engineering things that you needed to do for conversational interfaces, how to build chatbots in the cloud, leveraging serverless technologies. And a lot of it was around what we're starting to see now is how do you take these machine learning models and how do you break them up and make them into production? How do you get them into production? How do you apply that engineering rigor and discipline so that you can consistently and repeatably get the same results in production that you get in your dev environment? So they spent a lot of time turning that conversational natural language processing, natural language understanding sort of capabilities into code that they could then get through their pipeline to production. And now, fast forward to what we're doing now, it's the same sort of concepts, the same practices, the same engineering rigor needs to be applied.
Exactly. I think back in, as you say, 2017, it was really about the democratization of AI. As you said, it's the first time AI had been sort of bubbled up to the top and exposed through those AI services. There was just a couple of them in AWS at the time. And we picked up Lex and we picked up Lambda and started using them. And we were pretty new to the cloud as well. And all of a sudden, a bunch of, engineers sitting in Belfast who'd never done data science before were doing machine learning. And you had this kind of like, okay, AI is escaping just from the researchers and the data scientists into developers' hands who are now going, well, hold on a second. Yeah, how do we apply engineering practices to this? Because engineers had a very different perspective. And I guess now we're seeing it like AI is not just in developers' hands through APIs, but it's out in the wild for everyone now.
Yeah, and I think even applying that serverless mindset and ideology to this as well around, is there any managed services that can take this operational burden off me? Right. And I know you spent a lot of time exploring Amazon Lex, figuring out how to do the intents, how to do the slot fulfillment, and figuring out and working with those teams to figure out, but like the Rapid7 guys, work with the cloud partner, work with Amazon to figure out what's the best way to do this for our needs and for our use cases.
Yep. I torture the Lex team to this day. They still can't get rid of me.
But I think like a lot of what we're seeing now in the emergence of the new sort of AI capabilities, chatbots, ChatGPT, generative AI, a lot of those same things apply. And I know you spent a lot of time working on getting confidence that the results from your chatbot, the results from your call center agents was actually consistent, and building that confidence was a lot of the work that you had to do in testing.
Yeah, it's still something that people struggle with today, though, in those services. And like I put a blog out at the start of this year on how to build really good models, because people were coming to it. They didn't have any machine learning. They didn't really understand how the data you put in changed what you got out. And so being able to put down and say, here is advice, and then you're going to get much better containment rate when you talk to your bot. It's going to know what you mean, and you're going to be happier. Your customer's going to be happier. Developers are going to be happier. Your CEO is going to be happier.
It's a win, 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 win. So I think that the big exploration around that time, I think, was around, and I remember having conversations that, like everyone, we need to get into AI. We need to train everyone who's done maths at university. Let's take that person and let's train them in data science. And that's a long, long journey. You know what I mean? It's not saying that data science aren't important, they're incredibly important, but you can't take a Java coder and all of a sudden flip them to be a data scientist. It's not that easy. But the big thing that and it's really part of the serverless thing. I mean, you don't want to be sitting taking kind of EC2s and VMs and trying to make them do these fantastic things. You're better to go further up that value chain. And it was the same with AI. And the thing that we started to kind of discover is that this concept of ML engineering, it's not about creating the model. It's about how you actually productionize the model. That's the important part of what you do with it. And that was really that. Like once you have a working model and you have a modern cloud platform, what can you then do to create value for your consumers, business stakeholders, etc.? And then lo and behold, ChatGPT comes out and it just blows everything out of the way. And the funny thing is we had done lots of Wordly maps in the past, and I wouldn't say we predicted ChatGPT, but we knew some things that weren't valuable, and we knew that something like this would happen at some point. And then it almost happened overnight. So, of course, when anything like that happens and hits the news, and there's two things I want to hit on here. CEOs get very excited. Every company's like, oh my God, AI, let's go. Let's AI this, and so the gold rush starts, which is always fun. And then you get the demand. Can we put ChatGPT into our product tomorrow? And you're like, what about everything else you just asked me to do? So there's always that kind of pressure, which is good. And then actually what ChatGPT is, do we want to do a quick definition of ChatGPT, or do we all know? It's like
everyone know what it is. Everyone sort of used it or explored it. Yeah,
it's not magic. It's like a large language model, but it's just very impressive. And then, I mean, I think when CEOs start to say, right, this is something we need to get a hold of, probably for you, Gillian, I mean, you would see a lot more companies from where you are. Is the demand there for companies? Like, are we just in a tech bubble, or is there really demand here?
I think every single company right now is absolutely dying to get their hands on large language models. They've seen, everybody has been able to go out. I think what changed is ChatGPT was on the internet. Anyone could go and use it. They didn't have to set anything up. They didn't have to log into a cloud console somewhere to try it out. And that really has sparked imagination. And everybody is really, really, really keen to get, you know, an LLM into everything. But the key point is you really need to consider, you know, you don't want to just use something because it's new. So is it just novelty or is there utility? So is it actually going to help you, or are you just adding something shiny?
Yeah, and I think this is where, you know, the generative AI sort of generation is a little bit different from the crypto generation. People were able to actually see useful value from it immediately, right? And I think that sort of helped spark the adoption. People were actually getting valuable, useful results from it pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, we spent 10 years trying to figure out what to do with blockchain. ChatGPT, you could figure it over the weekend. And then I know there's the thing about, one of the things that I think it's a brilliant, we've got the ML stack for AWS. I mean, I always thought that was really useful to try and help people understand whereabouts in that stack you need to go. Maybe we'll just flick that up, Gillian. These have probably all seen this, like, but you're probably better qualified to talk to it than me.
Yeah, it doesn't actually have Bedrock on it yet. So you've got those different layers. So Dave and I love the cow analogy, right? We like to talk about. So if you imagine the AI was butter, you've got lots of different ways that you could have butter. So you could buy a cow. You could buy a whole herd of cows and have a whole farm. You'd have to look after them, and you'd have to feed them and care for them and house them. You'd have to milk them yourself. You'd have to then churn the butter yourself, but you would have controlled everything. You would have exactly what you wanted. Or, you know, you could just buy some raw milk from a farmer. So instead of being at that bottom layer where you're controlling everything, you've got the ML frameworks and infrastructure, you come up a layer where some things are done for you, but you're still doing some of the work yourself. So you're still churning the butter. You've got to handle that piece yourself, but you don't have to, you know, look after a bunch of cows. And so in that middle layer, we have things like SageMaker, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, which is a whole suite of different tools, different like ML engineer tools. Or, and I'm sure two of you have done this before, you just go to the shop and you just buy butter. You just buy butter, and then you have butter, and you can focus your time on using the butter to do things like make cakes or, you know, put it on toast, and you don't have to put as much effort into it. And it's exactly the same with the AI. We've got the top layer. Those are managed services. So they're, you know, in that serverless mindset. You can try them out. If it doesn't work, turn it off. You never pay anything more. You haven't wasted months and months trying to build a model. It's a really great way to start and experiment. And then if there's a differentiator for you, you can work your way down. So I think things like Amazon Bedrock that's coming out is going to put a large language model behind an API call. It's going to let you tune it via APIs. It's great because companies are going to be able to come in and they're going to be able to try it themselves in a really controlled and easy and pay-as-you-go way, and then say, yeah, here's where it really works for us, or here's where it doesn't actually give us as much. It's fun, but it's not really giving us more business value.
And I think, I mean, any executive or anyone I ever talked to about AI, I always threw up that. I don't want to be too much, sorry, Gillian, of Amazon fanboy, like, but I always threw up that diagram and says, well, let's have a conversation about AI. Do we want to start at the bottom and invest literally millions of dollars, or do we want to start at the top and try something tomorrow? And other cloud providers have similar diagrams. Just put that in there. So I think, but I do want to get a couple of questions in a few minutes, but I think for us, it's like, what's the developer impact of all this stuff? And like we talked about that landscape of serverless and AI, the fact that there's AI is becoming commoditized behind services. The thing that's interesting about ChatGPT is the fact that things like Copilot and CodeWorkspeak can start generating code, etc. So it becomes this kind of superpower for engineers, and I think that's where it gets super interesting for us and clashes with that serverless mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. I think have you all used ChatGPT or other things for coding, right? it really is starting to become your per programmer, right? We've all had the browser open, trying to triage and troubleshoot issues. And I think that's going to be a bigger part of the developer experience going forward. You're starting to see the tools being baked into your IDEs. You're starting to see Code Whisper. You're seeing GitHub Copilot. You're seeing the Code Star from Hugging Face. The open source sort of chatbots are starting to come out now to guide that development. And a lot of the activities that developers do, the writing of the code, is becoming more and more of a commodity type of activity. So there's risk there that we need to make sure that the things that you're doing as a developer are aligned to delivering real value, because you gotta, if the chatbots can generate the code, if your IDE can generate the solutions that you're doing, you need to make sure that the stuff that you're doing is actually valuable. You got to make sure that you align it to a real user need before you start knocking out lots and lots and lots of code.
So fun. I think it is interesting because the move to using those sort of tools for development is changing how we think about language again. I mean, I do have a tiny bit of sadness, and it is the way it's going, is the way it's going to be. But we had this moment where it's like, okay, so we've worked so hard at we have to work out what the computer thinks, and we have to talk to it in the way it wants to be talked to. Then we move to this moment where it's like, okay, the burden's on the computer to understand us. We brought in chatbots, we brought in conversational AI. You just say whatever you want, and the computer understands you. But now with prompts and large language models, you now have to start adjusting yourself back to how the computer understands you again. So you can't just say whatever you want and it will understand. People spend a long time working out exactly the prompts. So you're not going to pass about code snippets. You're going to pass about prompts. I mean, here's the exact words you need to use to get this thing to generate. And here's what you need to add to it to say this, because language is very inexact. And it does mean lots of different things. So for instance, just this week, we were looking at call transcripts and okay, what can you pull out of it and how well can it work with different things? And my manager, if you ever see this video, hi Bamba, he had asked it, he said, we're using Anthropic, and he said, how did the call go? And it said, well, at first, the person said this, and then they said that, and then they wanted this, and then this action was taken. And of course, that wasn't what he meant at all. He's like, well, I asked it, how did the call go? Why is it telling me this? And I'm like, well, yeah, that's a valid interpretation of how a call go. English isn't his first language. It wasn't what he expected it to do, but it is a valid thing that a human would understand. So we are going to have to start to learn, okay, how do we leverage this? What are the right things to say, not say? How do you get the best value?
Yeah, and I think like we've seen in the previous iterations, back in 2017, testing and verification and quality engineering are going to be high value activities, right? So the time you're saving from actually generating the code and generating your solutions, you're going to need to reinvest that time into testing. I think being able to consistently and repeatedly be able to verify that it's giving you the results that you want is where you're going to need to spend more and more of your time, because these models can change. They can change underneath you. You're not going to get predictable results, and you need to be able to factor that in and make sure you have all your scenarios and the behaviors and all the intent and all the things that you need. You need to be able to test for consistently.
Yeah, because you have to remember that the primary thing that a large language model is designed for is to sound good, to sound natural, to generate text that sounds really impressive. Not necessarily to be true.
Yeah, I think there's two really important points there. Is that for me, you still need to understand the code, right? Because if the LLM suggests stuff, you still need to really figure out. It starts you off, but it's not ready. If it gets you to 90%, great. You still need to know the last 10%. You still need to find the bits that are wrong. So it's not like, you still need to have expertise. And the second thing, I think the whole area of prompt engineering is interesting. And it's a wee bit like, if you think of pre-DOS and pre-Unix, computing was nuts. And then the command line came in the prompt. Like when Unix came in, it was like the prompt of things now, grep now means something. Do you know what I mean? So it's almost like the resurgence of prompts, but they're slightly different. So there's almost like a reprogramming of what these intents are like, which I think is exciting. Do you want to bring up the map?
If you want.
Let's go deep. Mark, you can talk to this.
Yeah, so I think the role of a prompt engineer, and you'll probably hear a lot more of these sort of elements coming through now. Where you have your prompt templates, you have your embedding databases, you have your vector DBs, you have your vector search algorithms, and then you have the actual LLMs. And this is a map from Mark Craddock, who's definitely somebody you should follow. He's doing a lot of really interesting work in this space around what it takes to be a prompt engineer and what is the value chain of components that are evolving rapidly in this space. He has a later version of this, which has about another 50 or so elements on it. And
I don't understand the later version.
Yeah, but he's been very good at articulating what each of these components are and how they're evolving. But he's also been using ChatGPT to generate some of his tutorials and some of the documentation that goes along with this map. And he's using a lot of, so if you check him up on Twitter, you'll find what he's doing there. He has really good tutorials where you can actually deploy a lot of this. And you can use tools like Streamlit and Steamship and some of the models here to actually deploy this and deploy and leverage these and play around with them for free. So it's definitely something you should start to explore. It's a new language that developers are going to need to understand. There's new components at play that are evolving very rapidly. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
I think I want to hit a few questions in a second, maybe not about this map, but that evolution is happening really quickly. And the thing we said about getting higher up the value stream could never be more true. So you'll find that things that were maybe quite difficult to do are now quite easy. It's a solved problem. So I think that whole idea of what are the prompts and what are the things that you need to focus on as an engineer, again, marries quite well with that kind of serverless mindset.
Yeah, I think like a lot of what we've been advocating for a number of years now is make sure that you're delivering a well-architected solution. So those pillars still apply to this, right? So there's lots of concerns around security of your data. What data are you loading into these models? Are you giving away your intellectual IP? All of that's coming to the fore. The cost of this, right? You need to be very focused on the cost. And Ryan and Lars did a great talk about having that observability of your costs and then making your decisions appropriately, right? Operational excellence. How do you actually leverage this stuff? How do you deploy it consistently? Reliability, high availability, the performance of this. And increasingly now the sustainability of these models. So all of those sort of 6 pillars still apply to what you're doing. So you can generate this stuff really quickly, but you got to make sure that you're thinking about those architectural concerns and you're thinking about a well-architected solution, not just a rapid solution in production that exposes all your company's data.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I suppose in summary, like, do we still need to code? Yes, but as always, code is a liability. So I think that's pretty much it. Is there any questions or anything people are curious about?
Any questions? Raise the hands up, please.
Grab us after.
Yeah, grab us after.
If I can ask one then. So I'm just going to assume that you've said yes. So if serverless kind of deprecated the whole skill set of managing your own on-prem data center, do LLMs deprecate the skill of creating your own models in-house and managing that infrastructure? Are there going to be a lot less people who need that skill set going forward? Will LLMs kind of deprecate a lot of models that companies would have built themselves?
You've got more expertise than me, Gillian, but I would probably say no, because LLMs are only a certain type of model. There's many, many other types of model.
When somewhere still owns a cow. No. It will change things. And with everything, with those more generalized models and available open source or through the APIs, people won't have to build as many custom things. But then you will look at people building on top of those foundational models for their own specific like domain, and like they won't necessarily want them to be generic ones. They'll want their own in-house ones. So I think there will be a change in it, but everything's changing all the time. Who knows what models are coming next? Who knows what next thing? So
yeah, and I think the initial cost of training those larger models was hundreds of millions potentially, right? I think with the emergence of the new smaller models and the ability to fine tune them, and it's on the map there, but the Lambda and the Alpaca type stuff, developers can do it on their laptop for a couple $100 if they really wanted to, or they can do it pretty inexpensively. So this is evolving rapidly. The barriers to entry are coming down very quickly, and like when we talked about earlier, there was that first wave of democratization of AI capabilities, right? We're starting to see this new wave of democratization of AI capabilities, and I don't think companies will want to have their own internal models that's trained on their own data for all of the security issues and all of the things that they're concerned about, right? So I think the cost of that's starting to come down. So yes, they'll probably have their own LLMs, but they'll not be the same as what OpenAI have done.
Yeah, and I think there was always this thing about one big model, one big brain will rule everything. Much like Spot the Unix nerd, much like Unix, small atomic functions that do one thing well. So I think you'll see lots of smaller models or smaller agents that do something very well. And then the communication between those becomes important, like your interprocess communication in old language. Don't know what that's called in new language. Intermodal communication. I don't know.
I think the impressive thing at the minute is that those generalized models can do so much, but that mostly people end up putting like boundaries around them. But you can do very impressive things like the retrieval augmented generation, in which you don't have to train the model. What you do instead is you get the small piece of information, to use open search or something, and then say, okay, from this one thing and only this one thing, could you give me the answer? And then the generalized model will be like, oh, I'll look at this and I won't just like make up an answer from the internet. I'll use the thing you've given me in this moment, but you haven't trained it on it. But I do think that not everything needs a large language model. As Dave said, much smaller language models will handle most tasks. So for the environment and for not, burning giant servers every day, all day for small tasks, I think we need to move back.
Yeah, I think the answer finally is make sure you understand your users and their needs, and only bring to bear a model if it's actually meeting somebody's needs. Don't just deploy loads of AI capabilities searching for a user, right? Work from the users down.
And just to maybe to discuss a little bit about the negatives of this, because, for example, I have friends who work in risk analysis, in financial risk analysis and so on. And one of them rang me up the other day, having just learned about LLMs and, explored ChatGPT. And she was genuinely freaked out, and in her professional opinion, this could end the world, And I think I can out-dweeb you at this point, because I asked an LLM model last night, please explain the plot of the Babylon 5 episode TKO, which you, of course, all know. Yeah. But it actually explained the plot very well. 70% it got exactly right. The other 30% it just completely made up. Yeah. And actually accused fictional characters of crimes that they didn't commit. So fortunately, there were fictional characters. But there are people who are going to use this as a research tool, and the results they're going to get back are like 80% correct. And the other 20% is just going to be totally wrong, but very, as was said, very, very plausible, So can we talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, that's the hallucinations. I remember doing a talk a couple of years ago with some fourth industrial revolution thing, and I said that lawyers will be completely obsolete by AI, and don't send your kids to do law at school. So it was almost a riot. Wasn't a tactile audience.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of legal questions that still need to be answered, and there's a lot of questions around the liability. So if you're using a model and it does something bad, are you liable? Is the person who made the model liable? Because it's not all in-house now, and there is this whole chain of things where it goes down. And because you aren't controlling the output in the same way you would have been. So if you were using those chatbots earlier without generating, you trained it to understand input, but you controlled the output. But now you're letting the model give the output. So I think in a lot of cases, you're either using it where it's very, very low risk, or you're using it to augment humans. So you're saying, here's a first guess, take a look, check it's right. But you do need to be careful in your business, because once you have people who are now used to this thing, are they going to just start to click it? Or they won't have watched Babylon 5 and they'll say, well, that must be right. Seems plausible. Yeah,
I think it's probably, since we're in Rapid 7, I guess, there's a new threat model emerging, right? You need to make sure that you've mitigated those types of threats to your business. Do you really want to expose these models directly to your customers and users? like Gillian mentioned, you probably want to have a human in the loop here for quite some time until you have more confidence that it's doing consistently what you want it to do.
Yeah, otherwise you end up in the scenario as happened with the post office, where the computer says you've committed fraud, so you've committed fraud, and there's no appeal. So let's throw it out. Come on, anybody have any questions that they want to ask, or are we all going to be very Belfast and non-committal? I mean, you're a very non-committal crowd, aren't you?
Anybody apart from Kieran?
Question? Yes, excellent. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. This term hallucination, is it not kind of terrifying? Like if your system did 20% of the things wrong, it's filled with a guild of bugs. Like, but we're calling it hallucinations. It's bugs. Is that not fair to say?
It's not a bug. It's exactly how it works. Well, you have to understand what that is. So it's like super autocomplete on steroids. They are called language models, but the model doesn't think of language in the same way you as a human would. It's really just words. So it's a whole pile of words and the connections between words and how do they fit together into sentences and paragraphs and things like that. So it is just making its best guess. But because you know that it may just make things up, that is when you really need to be careful what you use it for. That prompt engineering comes in where you put the restrictions around what it's allowed to do and what, like, don't come back with this, only look at this documentation, don't look at anything else. And this is where you have to be very careful. And people do need, because it sounds plausible. It is really, really good at sounding like, yep, this is definitely correct, 100%. So yeah, it is, yeah, you wouldn't accept your stuff working, only 80% of the time. And you shouldn't put out a system, in a critical scenario that, is going to do the same.
Yeah, it's just language, you know what I mean? It's like if you needed medical advice, it's like asking a doctor versus your mate who just read a medical encyclopedia. Your mate might use the right words, but you know that he or she has no idea what they're talking about. So it's just language.
Yeah, and again, we chatted earlier about this, but that investment in quality engineering, testing, consistency, and putting it through a pipeline and making sure you can get repeatable results from it is going to be critical, right? Before you have, like, a lot of this, you want to have confidence that it's doing the right thing, right? And one way of getting confidence is having really rigorous, well thought through tests for your models.
I think Kevlin Henney was making fun of somebody on Twitter the other day who was saying, look, the outputs are always right. It's just that sometimes we're in the wrong universe. We're not in the right phase space, man. We're out of alignment,
Yeah, I think like Anthropic had a nice way of describing it where they said, imagine the model is a naive 9-year-old with an encyclopedic knowledge and treat it that way.
Yeah, I've got my question. So I think the other big legal challenge I've seen to the LLMs is the provenance of the data sets, where it's some of it is just stuff grabbed off the internet, so the copyright is an issue. And I think Germany's been making a load of noises about GDPR compliance. Do you see that being a major challenge, or how do you see that being overcome?
I think the source is mental, and I think for businesses have given answers based on ChatGPT, you need to be able to say, you need to quote your source, and sometimes you don't know, or even sometimes it's out of date.
Yeah, and you're starting to see those concerns being addressed head on, where companies are being much more transparent about where they're getting their data from. And I know the likes of Amazon Code Whisperer, you can pick what licensing comes with the suggestions that they have. And I know some of the open source models that are starting to emerge now are very clear that they're only trained on permissive models for the open, like GitHub or whatever, right? So it's definitely, you'll probably see a lot of this coming to the courts. I know, especially around the image generation stuff, and I think when you get into the music sort of models as well, there's big sue balls waiting to happen, right? People are going to get upset that they've just lifted all of their intellectual property and used it to train their model, and now they're benefiting from it. So I think this is definitely going to be emergent behavior where the lawyers are going to start getting involved very soon, I think.
Didn't you say there was something? Was it ChatGPT? It trained on an old version of the AWS SDK. What was that again?
Yeah, that's the thing I think as developers we need to be careful with, especially using some of the the coding assistants is they were trained in 2021, right? AWS, SDK V2 was the go forward then. There's V3 out now. So any of the suggestions it's going to give you for GitHub Copilot, until they take the time, effort, and expense to retrain the model, you're going to get suggestions from that point in time. So there may be new enhancements, new capabilities that it won't actually suggest to you. So again, you need to have the human in the loop, the engineer in the loop. You need to have your own expertise, and you got to keep learning. You can't just offload all your thinking to the model.
Cool. Another question here.
The US Copyright Office recently, a couple of weeks ago, stated that if you used AI to generate images, you had to declare it, and that it was ineligible for copyright. I think that was in part or whole AI generation. Is there a concern this could apply to other outputs from AI?
What are you thinking of? Are you thinking of like books and things like that people are writing, or?
I mean, if we're using AI to generate code, what if they turn around and say the use of AI to generate your code means it's not copyrightable at all?
The
Like
copywriting of
images?
code is contentious in and of itself, isn't it?
Copyright of code it's not really contentious.
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward. The company owns it, but
Well, I think,
it's the fact that images, they've made this really strong statement that you cannot claim copyright on AI generated art.
So the model is just reusing stuff that's in its own model and sticking it together, which I guess is how most code is written by humans also. So the question is, should you own it if a model wrote it and it's basically someone else's code it's learned from?
I think it's a great topic. I think it's good to hear people making statements, but I think there's a lot more to travel on that topic around copyright and AI generated stuff, because I don't think there's a good match for it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's definitely emergent behavior. These new capabilities are out there, and now the consequences are coming home to roost, right? So it's definitely going to be an interesting couple of years when these things start to work themselves through. And once people start making lots and lots of money off these things, that's when typically the lawyers start getting involved, right?
I think as all of these things start hitting prime time and enterprises start actually adopting them, as you said, CEOs are expensive. They're going, yes, we're going to get thin. It's going to solve all our problems. That's when everything has to grow up and all the problems have to be actually shook out. And where did the data come from, and how is it licensed, and who owns the copyright? Those questions have to be answered, but the law isn't. It's lagging behind the technology because the technology is going so fast.
And I think companies will bring out features faster than the law is made. So it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I don't think the law's even kept up with the cloud environment, never mind the advent of AI. So it's going to be hard. And one of the points I had in my notes here was around, be kind. Empathy is going to have to be handed out in large doses here, because this is going to disrupt lots of people's lives, jobs, industries. And I think we, like as engineers, we need to be responsible and have a large dose of empathy with how we use these things and how we talk about these things, because people's jobs are going to change, and I think it's going to be a big impact to not only what we're doing here, but I think across the world.
As somebody with a philosophy degree, I think this is great, because there'll now be jobs for philosophers, because of all these wonderful questions like, you can retrain a model to make it 10% less biased, but that will cost you 50,000 tons of carbon. Which should you do? So, any other questions there?
It's nearly time for a beer, I think.
Yeah. Any others going once? Yes.
The area of explainable AI, is that far off, or how does that work in relation to the model?
Well, my personal opinion, we spent a lot of time talking about that. I think this is just throwing a huge curveball into that, the way the LLM models are so out there.
Yeah, I think that explainable AI is so important. But yeah, with deep learning, with some of these models, it's much trickier to get those explanations out. But I think companies, if you're going to use it for real things that impact real people's lives, for models that are deciding whether you can get a loan or things like that, which are not your large language models, you're going to have to be able to explain why the computer said that thing. And if you're going to use large language models to make, recommendations to someone that is like really critical to their life, you better also be able to explain. I know that there is lots of discussions around it. I know it is something that lots of people are thinking about and trying to solve for, because the technology is going so fast, and open source is really exciting. As you say, someone can pull it down to their laptop, train it, but open source is going without the same restrictions that would happen in a big company, and so there's no gates, all the different things. So people are just going as fast as they can, but not always thinking about the consequences. But as it's coming back into, okay, companies want this and stuff, hopefully the discussion will push up, because it is so important, but it is a complex issue. But I know that the European Union has been doing a lot of discussion. They've put out some interesting stuff around, ethical AI and how can you explain what your model does and explain how you trained it and things like that. So what they're proposing looks actually pretty solid. So it is worth looking into what they're looking at. And there's definitely a lot of things out there.
Yeah, great question. All right. I think
that's us. Yes,
we'll
very good. Call it there.
Thanks very much. So just close out here. So thanks to Mark and Gillian for the chat. Just giving a wee round of applause. Thank you. Thanks again. I think that was, I really enjoyed the evening. So first of all, thanks to your speakers, Gerald, Ryan, Lars, and Mark and Gillian. I just kind of sat here, so I didn't really do much. Massive thanks to Rapid7 for Claire and the team for hosting. I think it's a great space. Thank you. And also thanks to Gareth, Gillian, Peter, Phil, and Will, all the organisers. So thank you. I think for me, there's a nice kind of shape to the evening. It's how can we make sure that we can help engineers build better service applications. We had Gerald talking about some of them kind of, really, really solid advice for kind of teams. Kind of Ryan and Lars talked about, when you start to get that scale, and then we've kind of touched on what the future might look like. Hopefully there's lots of things to take away. We'll probably have a next event in a few months' time. We'll just figure out what that looks like. Please feel free to give us a follow on BFS Serverless at Twitter, or give us a shout, say hello to us afterwards. If you fancy speaking or even helping with hosting of any of these events in the future, please reach out. We're always welcome. For me, this is more of a community that we just get this group together and keep having these conversations and help us all kind of grow and ultimately lift the profile and expertise of Belfast as kind of a tech location and Northern Ireland. So that's the kind of goal of these. We certainly aren't making loads of money off these. So that's it. I think people are welcome to stay and have a drink and have a chat. There's a couple of pots of curry left. I think Rapid7 are very generous. There's a nice bar on there, so go grab yourself a pint of Guinness and we'll be hanging about.
Yeah, so. I will say before we finish, like Dave said, if you'd like to speak, if you have a talk, this is about growing the community. So even if you haven't spoken at anything before,
yep.
And you think, well, I would like to, like the committee here will help you like put together your talk, will help you practice it. Everyone on it is very experienced speakers. So we are delighted to help people who want to start, sharing their stories in the community. So like, don't think, well, I haven't given a talk before, I couldn't do it. If you have an idea and you'd like to, like, reach out, we would be delighted to help.
Yeah, the more the merrier. Like, so I mean, it's about giving people a voice and sharing experiences. Don't be thinking your story's not good enough or it's not tacky enough. Like some of the best talks we had at the conference in February were first-time speakers with stuff that they didn't think would be interesting, and people love to talk. So, All right. So thanks very much. Thank you, and go enjoy your beer.